The rain woke me that it wasn't the sound. Exactly, it was the weight of it. That particular heaviness that hangs in the air before a storm breaks, pressing down on your chest like something unfinished. I opened my eyes to gray light filtering through paper windows, and for one suspended moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the droplets started.
Urgent.
Relentless. Beating against the roof tiles like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. I sat up so fast the room spun. Third month. Second day, the knowledge hit me before my feet touched the floor. Before I could even process the ache in my bones or the raw scrape of my own throat. I was 15 again. 15, and somewhere out there in the rain-soaked dark, my sister was still alive. Not dying. Not yet in my previous life. That life. The one I'd already lived and lost and would never ever forget. The rain on the 5th day had been the same. The same gray sky. The same furious drumming against stone. My family had found her in a ruined temple on the outskirts of the capital, so thin she barely cast a shadow, her skin stretched over bones that seemed too fragile to hold her together. The little silver bell bracelet our mother had tied around her wrist years ago, that was how we recognized her. That tiny chime, barely audible, like the last echo of a voice long gone. She'd looked at me with fever-bright eyes, and I'd fallen to my knees in the mud and wrapped my arms around her and promised everything would be fine. 7 days later, she died in those same arms. I'd held her while the life drained out of her, while her fingers, so cold, so terribly cold, went slack against my palm. I'd screamed for physicians who shook their heads and whispered about poison. I'd screamed for our father, for our brother, for anyone who could possibly undo what had already been done. I'd even screamed at the gods, bargaining, begging, promising anything if they would just let her stay. They didn't listen. The poison had been in her system for more than 10 days by the time we found her, administered in careful, measured doses by people who'd known exactly what they were doing. The final bowl had been the one that shattered whatever remained of her heart. After that, nothing could save her. I lived through the rest. Grandmother coughing blood, brother's riding accident, father accused of treason, the Shun estate raided and burned, but I didn't live. I just kept breathing, watching everyone I loved fall one by one, until finally it was my turn. And then I woke up 3 days before we were supposed to find her. 3 days to change everything. The door slid open, and Ching appeared with a bowl of medicine, her expression shifting from surprise to concern the moment she saw me sitting upright. "Miss, you're awake. The physician said you needed rest. What day is it?" My voice came out like gravel. She froze. "The 2nd day of the 3rd month, miss." Why, I was already throwing off the quilt, my feet hitting the cold floor before my brain caught up with my body. The 2nd day, not the 5th. 3 days. "Get me a horse," I said. Ching blinked at me like I'd lost my mind. "A horse in this rain, miss? Where on earth?" "The South City." I was halfway to the door before she could argue, and I knew what I would find there. In my previous life, when we'd brought my sister back, there'd been more than mud on her clothes. The faint scent of bitter medicine clung to her skin, and black ash had been ground into the soles of her shoes. No apothecary near the ruined temple. No charcoal kilns, either. The old servants had washed her body and found a piece of thin hemp rope tied around her ankle, blackened with age and filth, but no one had thought much of it. I thought about it now. I thought about it the way you think about a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit, the way you turn it over and over in your hands until your fingers ached at the old Jishing apothecary in South City. Long abandoned, the locals said. But in the spring of that year, the same spring, a group of mysterious tenants had rented out the rear courtyard. I'd only learned this shortly before my own death, and by then, it was far too late to matter, and not this time that I made it to the front courtyard just as my brother, Zheng Xiaoning, was coming back from his morning practice. He was still in his training clothes, sweat damp at the temples, his sword still half drawn from its scabbard. The moment he saw me, barefoot, half-dressed, rain plastering my hair to my face, his expression went from confusion to alarm. "Where do you think you're going to find her?" His entire face changed. 8 years. 8 years since the Lantern Festival, since a crowd had swallowed our sister whole and never given her back. He'd searched every corner of the empire. He'd begged, bribed, threatened. He'd spent sleepless nights staring at maps and letters, chasing rumors that always dissolved like smoke. Find who his voice had gone dangerously quiet, sister. Something in my eyes must have convinced him, because after a long, frozen moment, he muttered a curse under his breath and turned to shout for the guards. 6 men, he said. That's all we're taking. If you're wrong about this, I'm not wrong. The old Jishing apothecary looked exactly as abandoned as it was supposed to be. The door was sealed. Dust covered every surface. Rain had turned the courtyard into a muddy quagmire, the kind of mud that sucked at your boots and made every step feel like a negotiation. But I saw it, a fresh footprint, just inside the threshold. Someone is here. I barely got the words out before shouting kicked the door in once, twice, the rotten wood splintering inward like the broken ribs of a dead animal. Movement exploded from beneath the corridor. Men in black, charging toward us with blades drawn. His guards met them head-on, steel clashing against steel in the pouring rain. I didn't wait, the smell hit me as I ran toward the rear courtyard. That same bitter medicinal scent, the one I'd caught in my sister's clothes in my previous life. It was stronger now, fresher. The world tilted beneath my feet. The last room was locked. Something shattered inside. A bowl, hitting the floor with a sound that made my heart stop. Sister? Silence answered me. A man's voice, cold and calm. One more bowl, and she won't survive the night. My blood turned to ice. I was too late. I'd come 3 days early, and I was still too late.
No.
Not again did I grab the wood-cutting axe propped against the wall and swung it at the lock. Once.
Twice.
On the 3rd blow, it broke, and I was through the door before the lock even hit the ground. The man inside barely had time to turn. I swung the axe at the medicine bowl in his hand, porcelain shattering, brown liquid splattering across the floor in a dark, ugly stain, and then I saw her curled in the corner of the bed. Wrists bound with rope, face so pale, it looked translucent. Tangled hair covered half her face, but I recognized her eyes. Mother's eyes that I dropped to my knees. Sister.
Sister.
The man drew a blade, lunged, and suddenly shouting was there, kicking him across the room, the chaos around us rising to a fever pitch I barely registered. None of it mattered. Nothing mattered except the girl on the bed, the girl whose name I'd spent an entire lifetime mourning. Shin Xiaoying, I whispered. I'm here. I'm here. Her eyes opened slowly, so slowly it felt like watching time unspool in reverse. In my previous life, by the time I'd found her, she'd barely recognized anyone. But this time she was still conscious, still fighting. Her gaze settled on my face, and something flickered there. Recognition. Her lips moved. I leaned closer, tears blurring my vision. I'm Yuan, I said. Your sister.
I'm Yuan.
She stared at me for a long moment, then so faintly I almost missed it. Yuan. My arms went around her. She was so light, so terrifyingly light, and her skin was burning against my neck, fever hot, but she was breathing. She was alive. Then her body went limp in my arms. I caught her, panicking, and heard her whisper something. 2 syllables, so strange and out of place I thought I'd imagine them. 20. She passed out before she could finish at 20. 20 when I sat there in the ruins of that room, my sister's feverish weight pressed against me, my brother shouting orders in the background, and I couldn't stop replaying her last word. 20. In my previous life, she died on the 12th day of the 3rd month. Today was only the 2nd. I'd found her 3 full days earlier. She hadn't swallowed that final bowl of poison. She could still be safe. She had to be. The carriage ride home was a blur of rain and fear. I held her the entire way, counting the rise and fall of her chest, willing her to keep breathing. Through the window, the capital slid past in gray streaks, unseeing, uncaring. In my previous life, those 7 days after we'd found her had been the worst of my existence. I'd spent every moment wondering, what if we'd found her just 1 day earlier? 2-3 Heaven had given me those 3 days that I wasn't going to waste them. Sister? I whispered into her hair. This time you're staying. Do you hear me? You're staying. The carriage rattled on, and I held her tighter. Outside, the rain kept falling. It didn't stop for 2 days, so my sister remained unconscious through all of it. Our father summoned every physician in the capital, every one, from the most prestigious old masters to the traveling healers who usually worked for scraps and copper coins. Our grandmother even sent someone in the middle of the night to track down a retired imperial physician who'd sworn off practicing years ago. When he took my sister's pulse, his expression went dark. 2 different poisons, he said. One in her bloodstream, one in her organs. The dosage was calculated with care. Can you save her? He was silent for a long moment. If she'd arrived 2 or 3 days later, no. Not even the gods could have reached her. He paused, his weathered fingers still pressed to her wrist. Now 6 chances in 10. I nearly cried right there.
6 chances in 10.
In my previous life, every physician had said the same thing. There is no hope. But 6 chances in 10, that was something. That was a door still open, a thread still holding. 6 out of 10, I whispered. I'll take it. Father visited 3 times a day, his usual stern composure cracking at the edges. Brother moved into the outer chamber and slept there, not trusting anyone else to keep watch. Grandmother scolded all of us for being anxious, then quietly lit 7 eternal lamps in the family shrine, lamps that were supposed to burn until the person they represented was out of danger, and I never left my sister's side. And not once on the second night, her fever spiked terrifyingly high. She tossed and turned, muttering broken syllables that made no sense. Water, don't catch me. I held a damp cloth to her forehead, whispering reassurances I wasn't sure she could hear. Then near dawn, she murmured something else. Disinfectant, 21st century. I leaned closer. What did you say? Her eyes open. They weren't the eyes of someone barely clinging to consciousness. They were clear. Shockingly clear. Like a traveler who'd been walking through fog for years and had finally stepped into sunlight. We stared at each other. Sister, my voice cracked. Her gaze settled on my face. First confusion, then something soft and slow and complicated. Like she was remembering me from very far away. Yuan, I threw my arms around her. She made a small sound of protest. Pain, maybe, from the bruises I hadn't noticed, and I jerked back immediately. I'm sorry. Did I hurt you? Did I press on? She shook her head weakly. Then, after a long silence, the faintest smile touched her lips. You still cry so much. My hand stopped. Still. She'd said still. But I'd been 7 years old when she disappeared. 8 years of separation. 8 years of growing up without her. How would she know how much I cried now? I dismissed the thought as fever-induced confusion. She was weak. She was barely awake. She didn't know what she was saying. The imperial physician arrived soon after. He checked her pulse again, and this time his expression was almost optimistic. Waking is a very good sign, he said. Continue with the treatment I've prescribed. He wrote out a new prescription, and my sister watched him the entire time. Her gaze followed the brush strokes, her lips moving silently, as though she were reading something invisible. When he finished, she spoke. Those 2 medicines, she said quietly. The ones you wrote together, are they meant to be decocted at the same time? The physician blinked. Of course. Would it be possible to take them separately? He frowned. Why, I once heard a physician say that taking these 2 together for a long time can cause damage to the liver. To the what? To the internal organs. The room went very quiet. The old physician studied her for a long moment, clearly displeased. Eldest miss, where did you learn medicine? While I was running for my life. The silence grew heavier. Father, who had been standing behind the screen, stepped forward with an unreadable expression. The physician asked no more questions, but he studied the prescription for a long time before rewriting it, separating the 2 medicines in the afternoon. When everyone had gone, I sat beside her bed. Sister, I said. Do you really understand medicine? She leaned back against the pillows, looking frail and innocent and not innocent at all. A little.
Ich sagte her.
She stared back. That word you used, I said slowly. Liver. Why didn't the physician understand? Her eye twitched almost imperceptibly. A liver is just a liver. Then why didn't he understand? Perhaps the way I speak is rather advanced. Advanced, what does advanced mean? She closed her eyes. I'm going to sleep now. I didn't press her. Not then. But something strange had settled in my chest. Something I couldn't quite name. In my previous life, I'd only spent 7 days with my sister after she came back. She'd been unconscious for most of them. I didn't know what a healthy Xinxiaoying was supposed to be like. I didn't know what she was supposed to sound like. Perhaps this was just who she'd always been. Someone who used strange words and fought through fever and looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. But as I sat there, watching the moon rise beyond her window, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only just begun to see her. On the third morning, a maid brought in a bowl of calming soup. I reached for it automatically. But my sister raised her hand. Wait. She smelled it first. Then, to my confusion, she asked for a silver hairpin. Poison, I demanded. Not exactly. She dipped the pin into the soup, then placed a single drop onto a white porcelain saucer. The liquid spread, clear and harmless looking. Who prepares the soup each day? She asked the maid. It's from the kitchen. And who brings it? The maid had gone pale. My sister pointed at the orchid by the window. Pour it there. I stared, but she just repeated. Try it. Half an hour later, the edges of the orchid leaves began to turn black. I shot to my feet. The maid dropped to her knees.
It wasn't me, miss.
I swear it wasn't me. My sister leaned back against her pillows, her face utterly calm. I never said it was you, she said. Then she turned to me. Yuan. Yes, someone is very unhappy that I came home alive. I stared at the orchid as it slowly withered. In my previous life, my sister had died 7 days after she returned. Everyone had believed the old poison in her body was what finally killed her. But what if it hadn't been the only poison? What if someone had continued feeding it to her, even after she was home? Cold sweat spread across my back. My sister lowered her eyes to her own wrists. The purple marks from the ropes were still visible, fading but not gone. Since I returned, she said quietly, has anyone asked whether I brought anything back with me? My heart jumped.
No.
Why? She frowned, struggling to remember. That's strange, she murmured. They searched for it for so many years. Why would they suddenly stop? Sister, searched for what? She looked up. For one brief moment, I saw a sharpness in her eyes that I'd never seen before. I'd like to know that too. And in that moment, I knew that whatever had happened to her during those 8 missing years, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. In my previous life, grandmother first coughed blood on the 18th day of the 3rd month. It was the 15th now. 3 days remained. I left my sister's room and went straight to Songshao Hall, moving through the corridors with a purpose that scared even me. Grandmother was kneeling before her Buddha statue when I entered, her prayer beads sliding through her fingers in a rhythm I'd heard my entire life. She didn't turn. Your sister only just woke up. Instead of staying with her, you come here to torment me. Did you take your medicine today? I drank it. My heart clenched. Who prepared it? That made her turn. She looked at me with a mixture of irritation and genuine curiosity. Yuan, have you gone mad these past few days? I worry about you. I couldn't tell her the truth. I could only remember my previous life, how she'd fallen ill so suddenly, how everyone had dismissed it as a recurrence of an old illness. It wasn't until much later, after the estate had already crumbled, that a physician discovered the truth. Slow poisoning, administered carefully over months, disguised as weakness and age. This time, I'd replaced all her medicinal ingredients. I'd even had the kitchen water inspected. Nothing should have slipped through. Nothing could have slipped through, but I was still afraid. I crouched beside her knee. Grandmother, I said, for the next 3 days, let me inspect everything you eat, everything you drink, every single thing that touches your lips. She stared at me for a long, long moment, then she sighed. You've been stubborn since the day you were born.
Fine.
Inspect whatever you like. I turned Songshao Hall upside down. Tea, pastries, incense, medicinal herbs, everything. I even checked the rice jars in the kitchen. Nothing. Nothing. I was just beginning to relax when, early the next morning, grandmother swayed as she rose from bed. I caught her immediately. Grandmother, she pressed her fingers to her temple. Only a little dizziness. Nothing to worry about. My blood turned to ice. It had come. Even after everything I'd changed, it had still come. The same poison. The same symptoms. The same inexorable creep toward death. The physician arrived quickly. After examining her, his face was grave. "There are signs of slow poisoning," he admitted. "Only slight, fortunately." "What poison?" I demanded. He named the substance, the same one from my previous life, and my vision went white at the edges. I'd checked everything. Everything. What had I missed? My sister was still weak from her own ordeal, but when she heard the news, she insisted on being helped over. She didn't ask what grandmother had eaten. Instead, she walked slowly around the room, her gaze moving from the incense burner to the teacups to the prayer cushion. Finally, her eyes landed on grandmother's prayer beads. "Grandmother," she said, "may I see those?" Grandmother passed them over. My sister held them up to the light, examining the holes through each bead, then brought them close to her nose. "Bring hot water," she said. I ordered it immediately. We soaked the beads in a small basin, and within moments, an almost invisible sheen of oil appeared on the surface. The physician dipped his finger into it and brought it to his nose. His expression went pale. "The poison is on the beads." The room fell dead silent. Grandmother prayed every day. Those beads were never far from her hands. Her fingers touched them again, and then those same fingers touched pastries, touched tea, touched everything she consumed. Of course, she'd been poisoned. In my previous life, we'd inspected every scrap of food, every dose of medicine. No one ever suspected a string of prayer beads. "Who gave them to her?" I demanded. An old maid answered, trembling. "Second madam gave them to the old madam before the new year." Almost at the same moment, footsteps sounded outside. Second aunt, Madame Lin, swept in with several attendants, her expression carefully polite. "Mother, I heard you called a physician. Are you?" She saw the prayer beads on the table. Her voice died in her throat. Grandmother's eyes were cold as winter stone. "Where did these come from?" Second aunt's face went pale. A temple." "Which temple?" "White Horse Temple." My sister spoke suddenly. "White Horse Temple doesn't seal its prayer beads with this type of wax." Second aunt turned sharply.
Sighing.
"You've only just returned. What could you possibly know about temples?" My sister remained calm. "I don't know much about temples, but I know medicinal wax." Second aunt's face went even paler, and then, out of nowhere, a young maid dropped to her knees. "Old madam, please see the truth. A few days ago, this servant saw someone from the eldest Mrs. Courtyard touch those prayer beads." Every eye in the room swung toward my sister. My heart went cold. So this was how it had begun in my previous life. Sister had died too quickly for me to witness this part, but now that she'd survived, someone was trying to pin the crime on her. Second aunt seized on the accusation like a drowning woman catching driftwood. "You saw this clearly. Who is it?" "A maid named Chunya," the servant sobbed. "From the eldest Mrs. Rooms. This servant saw her come to Songshao Hall." I actually laughed. "Chunya, yes." I stepped forward, my voice steady as steel. 2 days ago, I transferred Chunya to the outer courtyard to decoct medicine. She hasn't entered the inner residence once since then. The maid's tears dried up immediately. "Also," I continued, "for the past 2 days, I've required everyone in Songshao Hall to wash their hands in the same basin of soapberry water. Anyone who handled those prayer beads will still have traces of the medicinal wax beneath their nails." I swept my gaze across the room. "Show me your hands." The maids behind second aunt went pale one by one. Then, an old servant standing in the far corner of the room slipped her right hand into her sleeve. My brother was on her in seconds, dragging her out by the arm. Pale yellow wax was trapped beneath her fingernails. "It wasn't me," the old woman screamed. The eldest miss ordered me to." "Enough." A cold male voice cut through the chaos from the doorway. I turned. A young man in the official robes of the Delhi court stood there, his features severe, a saber at his waist. He was tall and lean, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that missed nothing. Grandmother frowned. "The Delhi court," the man bowed. "Sheng Tingju, judicial officer of the Delhi court." His gaze moved to the prayer beads on the table. "Poison has been leaking from the Imperial Restricted Medicine Storehouse for weeks. The Delhi court has been investigating the matter for half a month. I didn't expect to find some of it today in the Yongning Marquis estate. My heart sank at imperial restricted poison. This was bigger than I'd imagined, bigger than a family feud, bigger than a quarrel between relatives. Sheng Tingju looked over every person in the room. Finally, his eyes stopped on me. "Second Miss Shen," he said. "I heard that you began inspecting all food and medicine in Songshao Hall yesterday. How did you know the old madam would be poisoned?" I realized, with a sinking feeling, that Rebirth wasn't entirely an advantage. If someone always arrived one step ahead of disaster, sooner or later, someone would ask how I lifted my chin. That I didn't know. I was just being cautious. Then why inspect everything? Because I am filial. The silence in the room was absolute. My sister lowered her head and coughed. It sounded suspiciously like she was trying not to laugh. Sheng Tingju's expression didn't change. "Second Mrs. Filial devotion has remarkably precise timing." I smiled back. Lord Sheng's suspicion chooses remarkably precise people. That was our first meeting, and I knew immediately, this man and I were probably not going to get along. He stayed in the estate for 3 days. 3 days of questioning servants, tracing the origin of the beads, interrogating second aunt. In the end, they discovered that the prayer beads had indeed entered through her, but she claimed to have bought them from a worshipper at a temple fair. The servant who had been bribed produced a banknote, but the money house it came from had closed 6 months earlier. Every trail had been severed cleanly. My unease deepened. None of this had appeared in my previous life. That meant my sister's survival was causing hidden things to rise to the surface, things I hadn't even known existed. Sheng Tingju, meanwhile, seemed increasingly interested in me. He asked a second time, "Why did you order a record of everyone entering and leaving Songshao Hall before the poisoning occurred?" Caution. Why replace the medicines before they were even prescribed? Filial devotion. Why did you suspect the poison might not enter through food? Intelligence. He stared at me for a long moment. "Miss Shin," he said finally, "if you were ever interrogated at the Delhi court, I suspect you would be extremely difficult to question." I smiled. "Don't worry, Lord Sheng. I'll try not to break the law." He had probably never met anyone so uncooperative. His expression became even colder. When I stepped out of the study, my sister was sitting beneath the corridor, warming herself in the afternoon sun. She looked much healthier now, color back in her cheeks, her eyes clear and observant as they always were. I sat down beside her and told her everything Sheng Tingju had asked me. "That man is unbearable," she said. "He's just doing his job." She gave me a look. "Whose side are you on?" Evidences. Her lips twitched. "If a prosecutor believed you just because you're pretty, born into a marquis family, and cried twice, that would be far more frightening." I didn't cry. "You cried all the time when you were little." "That was different. I was 7. "Fine," she said. "I won't mention it again." She was holding an account book, the estate's medicinal purchasing ledger, which Sheng Tingju had brought out to compare against the poison records. Her eyes moved across the columns with surprising efficiency. "How much Sichuan aconite does this estate use in a year?" she asked suddenly. "How should I know? The ledger says 27 gene entered the estate in 3 months. Is that a lot? Unless dozens of people in this household bathe in it every day." She circled several numbers with her finger. "Panilia, prepared aconite, cinnabar. The incoming quantities are all wrong." I frowned. Could the accounting office be stealing money? Possibly. She picked up another ledger. "But the outgoing records match." "What does that mean?" She thought for a moment. "Someone buys 10 gene of medicine and records 20. Then they forge usage records showing that all 20 were consumed. No one asks where the extra money or the extra medicine went." Cold crawled down my back. This was more than embezzlement. Someone was using the Shan estate's accounts to launder medicinal supplies, and among those supplies, there was restricted imperial poison. That evening, Sheng Tingju returned. My sister pushed the ledger toward him without preamble. "Lord Sheng, look at this." He flipped through several pages and his eyes changed. "Who noticed this?" I pointed at my sister. He looked at her. "Eldest Miss Shun understands accounts. Only a little," she said calmly. I nearly laughed. She seemed to understand a little of everything. Sheng Tingju immediately ordered the estate's medicinal purchase records from the previous 3 years sealed and examined. They worked until late into the night, and eventually, they found that of the 3 apothecaries supplying the estate, one had ties to the Imperial Medicinal Procurement System. Its name was Hald. When my sister heard the name, the teacup in her hand stopped mid-air. Sister, she was silent for a long moment. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. The estate where they kept me, she said. A medicine wagon came every half-month. The lantern hanging from it had the name Hall. My heart jolted. You're certain? Sheng Tingju stepped forward. Where was this estate? She glanced at him. Southeast of the capital. But I don't remember the exact road. I knew she was lying. She was afraid. That was the place where she'd been imprisoned for 2 years, locked away, force-fed poison, treated like an animal in a cage. I could see the tension in her fingers, the way she held herself perfectly still. Sighing, I said, reaching for her hand. You don't have to go back. She looked at me. Her fingers tightened around mine. Yes, I do, she said. I escaped once. I can't spend the rest of my life escaping every single time. And so the next day we set out together, my sister and me, side by side for the first time in 8 years. Sheng Tingju didn't want us to come. He argued, reasoned, even threatened, but my sister was stubborn, and I was worse. Without her, I pointed out. Can you find the estate? He went silent. Without me, I continued. Do you know which road she was taken through when she disappeared as a child? He looked at me for a long moment. Second mission, he said. You are very skilled at making refusal impossible. I smiled. Thank you. That wasn't a compliment. I'll take it as one. My sister, watching this exchange from the carriage, murmured something under her breath. You two actually suit each other well. I whirled on her. What? She immediately closed her eyes.
I'm asleep.
But there was a smile at the corner of her mouth, and I was suddenly very, very suspicious. My sister truly became stranger by the day. The old estate outside the capital was more abandoned than I'd expected. Half the wall had collapsed. Weeds covered the courtyard like a green tide. The roof was sagging in places, tiles missing, rainwater pooling in the hollows. It was the kind of place you'd walk past without a second glance, unless you knew what had happened inside. My sister stood at the gate for a long time. She didn't enter. Sighing, I said softly. If you're afraid, we don't have to go in. She shook her head. I'm not afraid. I waited. I just don't like it. She said the words lightly, but I knew her well enough by now to understand what they meant. Anything she could reduce to I just don't like it was probably something that had once nearly killed her, though we found nothing for 2 hours. Then, Sheng Tingju's men discovered an underground chamber hidden behind a false wall. Only rotten straw mats and iron chains remained. The walls were covered in scratches, long, parallel marks, carved by fingers desperate to find a way out. When I saw them, something seemed to block my chest. My sister remained calm. She crouched, running her fingers along the stones, and found a small piece of oil paper hidden behind a loose brick. Inside was half of a damaged prescription. It listed medicinal ingredients and dosages. Nothing obviously unusual. My sister studied it, her expression unreadable. Then her gaze moved to the lower right corner, a strange mark. Like a curved hook, I'd seen similar marks among the things my sister had written. The sketches she made when she thought no one was watching. What is that? I asked. Her fingertips stiffened. Something I used to draw, she said. When I was a child. You drew that when you were 8. Yes.
I ser det her.
For the first time, she looked away. I felt her secret clearly. Not the secret of 8 wandering years, something deeper. Something she'd never told anyone. We continued toward the rear courtyard. My sister stopped. There used to be a locust tree here, she said. You remember? Yes. This is where I tried to escape, she said. The first time. Her tone was calm. Too calm. I broke a rib climbing the wall. Later, I hid inside a firewood cart. They caught me the next day. They locked me up for 7 days without food. I couldn't speak. I couldn't bear it, she said. I couldn't bear the hunger. Sighing, stop. She turned. My eyes were already red. She looked at me, And then, impossibly, she smiled. It's over.
No.
My voice trembled. For me, I only just learned it happened. Because in my previous life, I'd only known she'd been missing for 8 years. I'd never known where she'd been. I'd never known what she'd endured. All my attention had been on the poison killing her, and then she died, and those 8 years had vanished with her. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry. She tilted her head. Yuan, she said. You've been looking at me lately like you owe me a fortune. I almost laughed. If only money were all I owed you. We didn't speak again for a while. But as we walked back toward the carriage, I held her hand in mine, and she didn't pull away. The attack came without warning. An arrow flew from the treeline, striking the carriage window. Then another. Then the clash of weapons outside, the screams of horses, the shouts of men. Sheng Tingju shoved my head low. Stay down. The arrow scraped past the window, but my sister, moved faster than I could follow. She kicked over the small table, grabbed a piece of broken porcelain, and sliced through the curtain cord. The back, she said as I stared. What? The rear window.
Go.
She'd already shoved open a hidden panel I'd never even known existed. How did you? Run first. Explain later. Another arrow struck. We climbed through the rear opening, and the moment we landed in the mud, a man in black lunged toward us. I couldn't breathe, but my sister scooped up a handful of dirt and threw it directly into his eyes. He gasped, shutting his eyes instinctively. She kicked behind his knee. The movement wasn't elegant, but it was brutally practical, and he went down. Now let's go. She grabbed my hand and ran, that we plunged into the trees. Footsteps drew closer behind us, and I was certain we were going to die, certain I'd failed again, when my sister stopped abruptly. This way. Sighing, why there are winds coming from that direction. And water. I still didn't understand, but she was already dragging me downhill. By the time Sheng Tingju and his men caught up, we were already a dozen paces downstream, our footprints washed away by the current. The danger had passed. Sheng Tingju studied my sister for a long moment. Eldest Miss Shin, he said, did you spend a great deal of time fleeing for your life? She wrung water from her soaked sleeve. Some. I kept staring at her. She finally turned. Yuan, if you keep looking at me like that, I'll start thinking I've grown an extra head. But I didn't answer, because for the first time, I truly understood that the sister in my memories had never been the real her. That pale, fragile girl lying in bed, too weak even to drink water, that had only been Shin Xiaoying during her final 7 days. Before that, she had struggled. She had escaped. She had learned medicine, learned how to evade killers. At 8 years old, she'd known enough to hide a page inside a wall, and I, in my previous life, had never known my sister at all. From the moment I opened my eyes that morning, I was waiting for the fire. In my previous life, at midnight on the 22nd day of the 3rd month, the western accounting room of the Marquis estate had burned. The fire was enormous, nearly a decade of old records destroyed. Later, when father was accused of treason, many ledgers that might have proved his innocence were already gone. This time, I prepared everything. Water jars.
Wet blankets.
Twice the usual night watch. I even ordered my brother to inspect the accounting room roof. Midnight came. No fire. The hour of the ox. Nothing. The hour of the tiger. Still nothing. I stood in the courtyard for half the night, freezing in the cold spring air. For the first time, an absurd thought entered my mind. Had my sister's survival changed the future? Sheng Tingju appeared beneath the corridor. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Go back inside, he said. They're not coming. How do you know? If someone truly intended to set a fire, they'd see these guards and choose another method. The moment he finished speaking, a faint sound came from the corner wall, a soft scrape of leather against stone. Sheng Tingju's eyes snapped up. There. A shadow vaulted over the wall. No torch. No oil. He ran directly toward the accounting room. My brother's men surrounded him in an instant. He was skilled, dangerously skilled, and he injured 3 guards before Sheng Tingju personally forced him to the ground. When they searched him, they found no fire starter, only a piece of paper. One number was written on it. 217. Sheng Tingju looked toward the accounting room. He wasn't here to burn records, he said slowly. He came to find something. My heart sank. In my previous life, the enemy had simply burned everything. Why steal now? Because we had already begun investigating the accounts, I realized. The enemy is changing their plans. That I looked into the darkness for the first time, and I understood. My memories of my previous life were not a map that would stay correct forever. Once I changed the road, the map changed with it. On the way back to the main hall, my mind was elsewhere. I missed a step on the wet stones, pitching forward. An arm caught me around the waist. Sheng Tingju pulled me upright. My foot landed squarely on the back of his hand. He made a small sound of pain that he immediately suppressed. I steadied myself and looked down at Lord Sheng. Does it hurt? What do you think? I couldn't help it. I laughed. He looked at me coldly. Is this amusing, Miss Shen? A little. Next time, I may simply let you fall. You won't. The words escaped before I could think. We both froze. I didn't know why I was so certain. Perhaps because during these weeks, whenever real danger came, the man who trusted me least had never once hesitated to protect me. We stood there for a moment, neither of us speaking. Then I turned and walked away. When we returned to the main hall, Lu Huanyan had arrived. I hadn't seen him for a long time. In my previous life, by this point, we'd already been engaged for half a year. He'd been the person I trusted most after my sister died, the one who stayed beside me through the darkest days. He'd promised to help investigate the truth. He'd brought me a letter in my sister's handwriting, a letter that seemed to prove she'd willingly contacted the people who destroyed the Shen family. That letter was where my suspicion of her had begun. Only shortly before my own death did I learn the truth. The first half of the letter was real. The second half had been replaced. Now Lu Huanyan saw me across the hall and smiled. That gentle, familiar smile that had once made my heart ache. Yuan, he said. I heard there's been trouble at the estate. I've been so worried about you. In my previous life, those words would have made my eyes fill with tears. Now, I only looked at him for a long, long moment. His smile faltered. What's wrong? Nothing, I said as I stepped backward. Young Master Lu. His face changed. You never called me that before. People change. Before he could say more, my sister emerged from behind the screen. She looked at us both with sharp, assessing eyes. Who is this Lu Huanyan? I answered calmly. Oh. She nodded slowly. So, this is the... She stopped. I stared suspiciously. The what? Nothing. She turned away. He looks rather like a villain. Lu Huanyan's expression darkened. Eldest miss, I think you misunderstand. Possibly. My sister looked back at him. I'm occasionally wrong about people, but usually not. After Lu Huanyan left, I finally asked, why did you say he looks like a villain? She answered with another question. Doesn't he? How would you know? His eyes and his mouth say different things when he looks at you. What does that mean? His mouth smiles. His eyes calculate. I went still, sighing. I said slowly, in the future, don't say things like that. She looked at me, puzzled. Then she understood. Yuan, she said softly. When choosing a man, don't choose based only on a handsome face. I wasn't understood. She nodded solemnly, then she glanced outside. Sheng Tingju was walking beneath the corridor. My sister added, without missing a beat, if you were choosing, the one outside is better than the one who just left. Shun sighing. She ran faster than I'd ever seen her move. I stood there, my ears inexplicably hot, and for the first time, I noticed that the rain had finally stopped. The day of my brother's riding accident was approaching. In my previous life, it had happened on the 7th day of the 4th month. He'd ridden his favorite black horse to the military training ground outside the city. The horse suddenly went mad, bucking, rearing, throwing him down a hillside. His right leg was shattered, and he never returned to active duty. When the Shen family later fell, he dragged his ruined leg from door to door, begging for help. Eventually, he died outside the prison. This time, 3 days in advance, I replaced the black horse. Then, I ordered the feed inspected. As expected, they found a medicinal powder mixed into it, something that would drive a horse into a frenzy. My brother exploded in fury. Who did this? I didn't know. In my previous life, we'd never uncovered this line. Sheng Tingju took the stableman away for questioning, and my sister watched me with an increasingly sharp expression. That night, she came into my room. Yuan. What? You knew something would happen to brother. The tea in my hand nearly spilled. What makes you say that? 3 days ago, you forbade him from riding the black horse. You also ordered people to inspect the slopes outside the military grounds. Before grandmother was poisoned, you replaced her medicine. Before something happened to the accounting room, you guarded it. Before brother's horse was drugged, you replaced it. Her gaze held mine. How do you know these things? I couldn't meet her eyes. Coincidence.
Fine.
She stood. If you don't want to tell me, I won't force you. I breathed out in relief, but at the doorway, she stopped. Just don't ask me anymore, either, she said quietly. Don't ask me how I know the things I know. Xiaoying, you're allowed to have secrets. She didn't look back. So am I. The door closed and I didn't sleep all night. The next day, my sister disappeared. She'd left the estate without telling anyone, slipped out in the early morning, and was gone for hours before anyone realized. I nearly lost my mind when my brother finally brought her back. She had a fresh knife wound along her arm. The moment I saw the blood, the memory of her dying in my arms slammed into me like a physical blow. Where did you go? I ran toward her. To investigate Jiren Hall. Why didn't you tell me? If I told you, would you have let me go? Of course not. That's why I didn't tell you. I was trembling with fury. Do you know people are trying to kill you? I know. And you still went, her expression hardened. Then what should I do, stay in this state forever? At least you'd be safe. Safe, she pointed toward grandmother's room. Was that safe, Shen Yuan? It was the first time she'd called me by my full name, the same tone I'd used with her, sharp and accusing and worried beyond words. I fought so hard to bring you back alive, I said, my voice breaking. So hard. She went quiet. Why are you protecting me? She asked, her voice softer now. Or, are you keeping a bird in a cage because you're terrified it will die again? I couldn't stop it. Every fear I'd buried for a month shattered at once, because you did die. She froze, tears poured down my face. You died after I found you. You only lived 7 days. You coughed blood every day, and in the end you couldn't even speak, and you died in my arms, and I begged everyone, and no one could save you. I couldn't stop. Then grandmother died. Brother died too. Father went to prison. The Shun family was destroyed, and eventually I died. Is that enough? That's why I know all of this. There wasn't a trace of color left in her face for a long moment. She didn't move. Then, slowly, she walked toward me. I instinctively stepped back, but she pulled me into her arms, gentle and fierce at the same time. Yuan, she said, her palm rested against the back of my head. In that life, she said softly, when I died, were you there? I nodded against her shoulder, too choked to speak. She held me tighter. You must have been so scared. I broke completely since my rebirth. No one had asked me that. Everyone only saw that I'd become cautious, decisive, clever. No one had ever stopped to ask, were you afraid? Only my sister. I clutched her clothes and cried like the child I'd once been, the 7-year-old girl who'd lost her big sister and never stopped looking for her. That night, we didn't ask each other about our secrets again, but something between us had changed. Some walls had fallen. The next morning, my sister came to me voluntarily. Her injured arm was freshly bandaged. The moment she entered, she shut the window, then the door, then told me to send Qing away. I stared at her. What are you doing? Confessing. She sat opposite me. You told me your secret yesterday, she said. Now it's my turn. I went very still. When I tell you this, she said quietly, you might think I've lost my mind. It sounds even more impossible than rebirth. I slowly straightened. She was silent for a while. Then, before I was born into this body, she said, I think I may have lived another life. I blinked. You're reborn too. No. She frowned, searching for the right words. I was born here, in this body. But before I was born, my soul lived in another world. I stared at her. Another world, and they didn't have an emperor. My first reaction was immediate. That's treasonous, sister. She laughed. Continue. She told me about a world where buildings rose higher than mountains, where carriages moved without horses, where people didn't need candles at night. Women could study, work in government, live alone, practice medicine. They could even investigate why dead people had died. She spoke slowly, as though gathering memories scattered far away. I studied toxicology there, she said. I also worked in a place that performed forensic examinations. That's why you recognize poisons. I only understand some of the principles. Then why didn't you remember before? She looked down at her hands. After I was born into the Shun family, almost all those memories disappeared. Only a few habits remained. When I was little, I always thought drinking untreated water was unhygienic, and I complained that the estate latrines were too close to the kitchen. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. When you were 5, you argued with the steward about that. I remember. She looked up. You remember, of course I do. You were so passionate about it. He didn't know what to do with you. Her lips curve, so it was already there then. Why do you remember now? I asked. She thought about it. Maybe the fever. Or, she looked at me, because of you. Me. When I woke up, you were the first person I saw. And suddenly, so many things came back. The room became quiet. I didn't know which part to be shocked by first. In the end, I asked only one question. The sister from that world. I said. Were you happy? She was silent for a long moment, then she smiled. It was all right. My parents died early. I studied alone, worked alone, ate alone. I survived. I reached across the table and held her hand. You won't have to be alone anymore, I said. Her eyes reddened instantly. She looked away. You were scolding me yesterday, she said. And now you're being sentimental. You hid things from me. So did you. We both started laughing. And then, for the first time, we laid everything out on the table. I spread paper across the surface and wrote down every important date from my previous life, the poisonings, the fire, the accusations, the deaths. Each one a wound, each one a marker of how we'd fallen. My sister studied them for an hour, then rearranged everything. You've organized these by time, she said. But they should be organized by purpose. She picked up the brush. Grandmother poisoned, she wrote. Remove the center of the Shun household. Brother's riding accident. Destroy the Shun family's next military generation. The accounting room fire. Destroy old evidence. Father accused of treason. Finish the family's destruction. She paused. And my death. The brush hovered. Silence a witness, she said. Then she drew one long line across the top. These weren't 5 different events, she said. They're one. She wrote. 8 years ago. Shin Xiaoying disappears. It's all connected, she said. I stared at those words, and cold spread through my body. Xiaoying, I said slowly. If they wanted you gone 8 years ago, if they continued targeting the Shin family afterward, that means whatever secret you found, it didn't end with your disappearance. She nodded. I need to tell you something else, she said. Go on. That prescription, we found the one hidden in the estate. It's not a prescription. Then what is it? Her eyes met mine. It's an account. What do you mean? The numbers, she said, spreading the fragment across the table. They don't just represent dosages. They're a code. Code for what? Her smile was thin and humorless. I think, she said, someone was using medicinal dosages to hide a secret military supply ledger. I think the answer to everything, why I was taken, why the family was targeted, why your previous life ended the way it did, it's all in that code. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the weight she'd been carrying alone for so long. I need your help, she said quietly. I can't do this alone anymore. I reached across the table and took her hands. Xiaoying, I said, you never have to do anything alone again. That afternoon, I summoned Sheng Tingju. He looked at the table covered in paper, dates, names, events, connections, and then at my sister and me. His expression was unreadable. You're finally going to tell me the truth, he said. I met his eyes without blinking. Part of it. He gave a cold laugh. I'm honored. My sister spoke first. Lord Sheng, she said. Your father died 10 years ago, didn't he? His expression changed instantly. I turned sharply. Xiaoying, how do you know? I've been watching him, she said calmly. He's investigating imperial medicine. He keeps focusing on records from 10 years ago. This isn't an ordinary case. Sheng Tingju was silent for a very long moment, then, slowly, he sat down. My father was an imperial censor, he said. 10 years ago, he investigated a military grain case on the northwestern frontier. The case was never closed. And then he paused, he died. My heart jolted. 10 years ago, around the same time our mother died, my father left me a copper seal, Sheng Tingju said. He took it with him everywhere. He never told me what it meant. He pulled it from his sleeve. It was small, worn, etched with several numbers. My sister's expression changed the moment she saw it. She took out the half-page we'd found in the abandoned estate, holding them side by side. Those numbers, she said. They match. How? Not the numbers themselves, she said. The pattern. She traced her finger across the prescription fragment, then across the copper seal. Lord Sheng, she said slowly. I may know why that prescription looked so strange. It's not a prescription at all, I said. It's a code. Sheng Tingju's eyes sharpened. A code for what? My sister smiled. And for the first time, I saw something like hope in her expression. Let's find out together. It took longer than we expected. The code was complex. Numbers nested within numbers, references hidden behind references. But my sister had experience with this sort of thing from her other world, and Sheng Tingju had his father's files, and I had my memories of my previous life. We worked for days. The first group of numbers matched warehouse designations from the Northwestern Grain Depot system. The second group referenced quantities of grain. The third matched medicinal batch codes. The fragmentary herbal manuscript wasn't an account book at all. It was a military supply ledger disguised as a medical text. And one name kept appearing, Xiao Qi. When Sheng Tingju saw it, his face went pale. This man, he said. He died 10 years ago. Who was he? An accountant. He was responsible for military grain transportation. How did he die? He contracted an epidemic while traveling. There was a report. He was buried in the Northwest. My sister suddenly stood up. I've seen him, she said. The room turned toward her. When I was 8, she said, at the estate. They locked me in the woodshed one night. I heard people talking outside. One man's voice was distinctive, a little rough. Later, when I escaped, I saw him again. She closed her eyes, concentrating. He had a piece missing from his left ear. Sheng Tingju immediately ordered someone to retrieve the original portrait from 10 years ago. When it arrived, my sister didn't even pause. That's him. A man who had been dead for 10 years was still alive. Following Jiren Hall's medicine routes, we eventually found an inconspicuous warehouse in the western city. We waited 2 days. Finally, late at night, a carriage entered the yard. An old man in his 50s climbed down, gray-haired, stooped, walking with a slight limp. A piece of his left ear was missing, and my sister gripped my wrist so hard it hurt. That's him. We closed the net that night. Xiao Qi didn't escape, but during questioning, he admitted nothing. Instead, he produced a statement from 10 years earlier, claiming that the Marquis of Yongning, my father, had been secretly altering military grain records. Suddenly, my father himself became a suspect in the old case. Sheng Tingju's expression was grim. The evidence was detailed, precise, almost convincing, but I was strangely calm. In my previous life, before father was condemned, the same thing had happened. Evidence appeared piece by piece. Every piece was real. And somehow, every arrow still pointed toward the Shin family. I see an inconsistency, my sister said suddenly. Sheng Tingju looked at her. What? She pointed at Xiao Qi's right shoulder. He can't move it properly, she said. When he reaches for things, he uses his left hand. Xiao Qi's expression flickered. In his portrait from 10 years ago, he'd clearly favored his right hand. If he changed hands, my sister continued, it must be because of an old injury. An injury that's at least 10 years old. Sheng Tingju immediately ordered an examination. A deep saber scar crossed Xiao Qi's shoulder, an old wound that had once cut almost to the bone. The old archives recorded that during the military grain case 10 years earlier, an unidentified accountant had been attacked on the northwestern frontier. He had taken a saber blow to the shoulder, then disappeared. Everyone assumed he'd died. The timeline matched perfectly. Xiao Qi's face finally changed for the first time. I saw Sheng Tingju truly angry. He didn't slam the table. He didn't shout. He simply placed every file in front of Xiao Qi one by one. 10 years ago, you faked your death, he said. We'll take your testimony again. You may refuse to speak, but your wound, the medicine warehouse, the accounts, the silver notes, one of them will eventually speak for you. By dawn, Xiao Qi finally spoke. He admitted that the people controlling military grain procurement 10 years ago weren't limited to officials from the Ministry of Revenue. There was someone else. Someone from the imperial clan, but the name he refused to reveal. When Sheng Tingji stepped from the interrogation room, he looked exhausted. I offered him tea. He didn't take it. Afraid it's poisoned, I asked. Afraid you're taking revenge for all the times I questioned you. I laughed. He finally accepted the cup and we sat side by side on the stone steps. Dawn was breaking, the roofs of the Delhi court glowing pale gold in the morning light. How old were you when your father died? I asked. 13. You've been investigating for 10 years. Yes. Did you ever think of giving up? He was quiet for a moment. Once or twice, he admitted. But no one ever told me why he died. I couldn't stop until I understood. I understood those words too well that after my sister died in my previous life, I'd wanted the same answer. Why'd he turn to me? What about you? He asked. You seem more afraid of losing people than anyone I've ever met. I said nothing. You don't have to answer, he said. But I want you to know something. What? He looked at me, and for the first time, his expression wasn't guarded. Shun Yuan. It was the first time he'd said my full name. I don't know how many secrets you're still hiding, he said. But after everything we've investigated together, not one piece of evidence has proven you untrustworthy. I raised my eyes. Morning light fell across his sharp, severe features. This man would never casually say, I believe you. He'd say the evidence hasn't proven you untrustworthy, and somehow, that meant more. Some people don't trust easily. But once they choose to stand beside you, that's far more reassuring than any careless promise. We're not done yet, I said. No, he agreed. We're not. The 23rd day of the 4th month, in my previous life, Imperial censors had stormed the Marquis estate that day. Inside a hidden compartment in Father's study, they'd found a secret letter exchanged with an enemy kingdom on the northwestern frontier. That letter had dragged the Shin family into ruin. This time, the hidden compartment was gone. Every person entering or leaving the study was recorded. My brother personally guarded the door. Sheng Tingju had placed men outside the estate. I waited from morning until noon. No censors. Evening came. Still nothing. At last, I relaxed that it had changed this time. It had truly changed. Then, shortly after the hour of the dog, the palace urgently summoned Father. Half an hour later, news returned. The Ministry of Revenue had accused the Marquis of Yongning of embezzling 120,000 share of military grain. I sat motionless. It's not treason. The accusation had changed. Xiaoying, I said slowly. In my previous life, the accusation was different. It was. I know, she said quietly. You told me. Then why? Because we prevented the forged treason letter. So they chose another method. I stared at her. Suddenly, I understood my memories of my previous life were useless now. I'd changed my sister's death. Grandmother hadn't been poisoned beyond recovery. My brother hadn't fallen from his horse. The accounting room hadn't burned. Every change was a stone dropped into water. The ripples had washed away the old future. I didn't know what would happen tomorrow. I didn't know where the next blade would fall. And I no longer knew whether I could save them. That night, for the first time, I truly broke. I locked myself in my room. The table was covered with all the dates I remembered from my previous life, page after page of notes, carefully written, carefully organized. Suddenly, they were worthless scraps of paper. My sister pushed open the door. Leave, I said. She sat beside me. I said leave. I heard you. Then why? Because I'm not going. I finally looked at her. Xiaoying, I don't know anymore. Don't know what? The future. I don't know what happens next. The moment I said it, tears fell. Xiaoying, if I don't know, how am I supposed to save all of you? She was quiet for a long moment. Then, suddenly, she laughed. Are you laughing at me? At how foolish you are, Shin Yuan. She flicked my forehead. Who in this world actually knows what tomorrow will bring? I stared at her. For all those years I was gone, she said. Every morning I woke up not knowing whether they'd catch me. I didn't know if I'd eat. I didn't know what the next city would be. And I survived. She gathered all the pages covered in dates and folded them, one by one. You aren't intelligent because you lived once before, she said. You just never believed you could win without those memories. I said nothing. Before you knew when danger would arrive, she said. Now we know someone is laying a net around us. What exactly is there to fear? There was a knock at the door. Sheng Tingju entered. He glanced at the folded papers, asked no questions, and placed a thick stack of files in front of me. The records for the 120,000 share of Northwestern military grain, he said. I stared at them. We don't know the future, he said. So investigate what has already happened. The past can be investigated too. I looked at him. Then at my sister. Slowly, I smiled. In my previous life, by the time I reached the end, I had no one. At this time, I no longer knew the future. But the people standing beside me were more real than any prophecy. We investigated for 2 nights. Father's seal was genuine. The grain warehouse accounts were genuine. Only one thing was wrong. The time on the day one batch of grain supposedly left storage under Father's authority. Father had been in the capital attending an imperial ceremony. There was no possible way he could have personally signed in the Northwest. Someone had used an old seal he'd once left with the army. My brother found former subordinates who remembered it. Sheng Tingju retrieved postal station records. My sister recalculated the warehouse batch numbers. Eventually, we discovered that the so-called 120,000 share of missing grain had actually been assembled from shortages belonging to 3 entirely different years. The accusation looked complete, but it had been stitched together from scraps. 3 days later, Father appeared at morning court with a full chain of evidence. The impeachment was suspended. I stood at the gates of the Marquis estate, waiting for him. When the carriage appeared, I suddenly remembered my previous life, when he'd entered the palace and never come home again. The curtain lifted. He stepped down unharmed. When he saw me, he frowned. Why are you crying? I shook my head. I'm happy, I said. That was the first moment I stopped being afraid, because I finally understood. A different future was exactly what I'd been fighting for all along. After that, the investigation accelerated. The key to fully decoding the fragmentary herbal manuscript came from our mother's old ledgers. They'd remained locked inside grandmother's storeroom, untouched for years. My sister compared the medicinal quantities in the fragment against the military supply purchases our mother had recorded. After one night, she looked up. I found it. The numbers weren't money. They represented warehouse numbers, quantities, and batches. 10 years ago, 3 military granaries in the Northwest had been switching grain for years. Good grain replaced with old. Military medicines adulterated. Large quantities of genuine medicine diverted through imperial procurement routes and sold elsewhere. The silver eventually flowed into several private estates that didn't appear in any official registry. Sheng Tingju traced 2 of them. Both had connections to the household of Prince Duan. Prince Duan Xiao Tsong, the emperor's half-brother. For years, he'd cultivated the image of an idle prince. He loved flowers, opera, poetry. He supposedly had no interest in government, but for years, he had controlled imperial medicinal procurement. At last, every thread connected. Sheng Tingju's father had discovered irregularities in military grain. He died and our mother had realized someone was using the Shun household's purchase accounts. She died soon after. At 8 years old, during the Lantern Festival, my sister accidentally saw Xiaoqi, a man who was officially already dead. She was abducted. Later, Father took over military provision inspections, so the entire Shin family had to disappear. I stared at the table covered in evidence. The enormous net that had destroyed us all in my previous life was finally visible in its entirety. Lu Huanyan came to see me. He asked to speak to me alone. I agreed. He looked thinner than before, dark circles under his eyes, his usual calm composure frayed at the edges. Yuan, he said, you've traced this to Prince Duan. My heart sank. He knew, and stop. Stop what? He stared at me. You can't win. Do you know how many years Prince Duan has been preparing? How many officials are connected to him? How long do you think Sheng Tingju can protect you? I looked at him for a long time. That Lu Huanyan, I said. In my previous life, I stopped. Changed my words. If the Shin family truly fell, I asked, what would you have done? He said nothing. And suddenly I already knew. You knew all along, didn't you? His face went pale, at least part of it. I continued. You knew someone wanted the Shin family dead. You knew my sister's disappearance wasn't an accident. Even those things that made me misunderstand her. I was trying to save you. The answer that had tormented me for an entire lifetime had finally come, and it didn't hurt as much as I'd imagine. Save me, I repeated. By making me hate my own sister, by making me believe my father was guilty, by making sure that in the end, you were the only person left for me to depend on. His face was completely white. I loved you, he said, and I smiled. Lu Huanyan, I said. Your way of saving me was to stand on the corpses of my entire family. He closed his eyes. If I could do it again. There's no again. I placed the annulment document I'd already prepared in front of him. Our engagement is over. The Lu family can sign. If you refuse, that changes nothing. The Shun family will end it without you. He stared at the document for a long time. Then, quietly, do you like Sheng Tingju? I froze. That has nothing to do with you. I left him standing there, and when I stepped out of the reception room, I nearly collided with Sheng Tingju. He was standing just outside the door. How much did you hear? I asked. Are you asking about ending the engagement? He paused. Or about whom you like? I glared at him. Lord Sheng, I said. Eavesdropping is not part of Delhi court procedure, is it? No. Then why listen? He was quiet for a moment. Private conduct. He said. I could have sworn his ears were slightly red. Before I could say more, my sister came running down the corridor. Yuan? I turned instantly. What happened? One of the prescription fragments is missing. At that exact moment, someone screamed. I spun around. 2 masked men had dropped from the wall behind my sister. One threw a smoke bomb. I heard only her voice. Don't come closer. White smoke swallowed the corridor. When it cleared, my sister was gone. My entire body went cold. In my previous life, when they'd taken her, I'd been 7 years old. I could do nothing, but this time, the same thing would not happen. That Sheng Tingju caught my wrist. Don't panic. I turned sharply. He was already crouching on the ground. A short piece of red thread lay on the stones, from my sister's bracelet. I understood immediately. She'd left it deliberately. There's more than one, Sheng Tingju said. We followed the trail. Every few dozen paces, another fragment of thread. Through the side gate, down a narrow alley, into the maze of the western city. My eyes stung. Even while being abducted, she remembered to leave me a road. The final piece was beside a pile of rubble, and next to it, 3 marks in the mud. 1 circle, 2 vertical lines that I didn't understand them. Neither did Sheng Tingju. My brother was nearly frantic. What does it mean? Then I remembered. My sister had once taught me a few symbols from that other world. 1, 2. I looked up sharply. 12, I said. Warehouse 12. There were 15 old medicinal warehouses in the Western District. Number 12 was one of them. By the time we arrived, the building was already on fire. My heart stopped. Sister? I tried to rush inside. Sheng Tingju grabbed me back. The rear entrance. We circled around. The moment the rear door broke open, we saw a man lying on the floor, his hands and feet tied so tightly he could barely move. Who tied him? My sister's voice came through the smoke. I did. She emerged. Her hair was wild, the corner of her robe burning. She looked like she'd crawled through a battlefield. I ran forward and slammed into her with both arms. Careful, she said. You know pain exists after all. I hate you. I was crying and scolding her at the same time. I hate you. She patted my back. I'm not dead. Shut up. All right. Later, I learned what had happened. The men who'd kidnapped her assumed one young woman would be easy to control. They forgot what she'd practiced most during her 8 missing years, escaping. She used a thin blade hidden inside her hairpin to cut through the rope. While they argued, she used a medicinal powder against them. The man she tied up was a steward from Prince Duan's household. More importantly, he carried an entry token for one of Prince Duan's private military estates. 3 days later, The case was heard before the emperor. Prince Duan didn't confess at first. He even accused the Shen family of fabricating evidence to frame him. But this time, our case didn't depend upon one letter or one man's testimony. There were military grain warehouse numbers from 10 years ago, imperial medicine ledgers, 3 secret medicine depots, evidence that Xiao Qi had faked his death, statements from surviving soldiers, the copper seal left by Sheng Tingzhi's father, the private military entry token carried by Prince Duan's steward, and our mother's old ledgers. One line of evidence could be forged. 10 independent lines locking into one another could not all be erased. Prince Duan was stripped of his title and imprisoned. Officials involved in the case were investigated one after another. The Liu family was implicated for having known part of the truth and failing to report it. Liu Huanyan didn't go to prison, but his official career was destroyed. I heard he eventually left the capital, but I never saw him again. Father was cleared of all suspicion. Brother returned to military service. Grandmother slowly recovered. As for second aunt, she truly knew nothing about Prince Duan's conspiracy. But she had bribed servants and used the poisoned prayer beads against grandmother for her own petty purposes. Grandmother divided the household and sent her away. Not every wicked person belongs to some enormous conspiracy. Some are simply greedy, jealous. Some believe harming their own family will never come with a price. Now, the price had finally arrived. The day everything ended, my sister and I sat in our mother's old courtyard. She suddenly took out a small piece of aged paper. For you. I unfolded it. The paper was old. The writing was so faint it was almost invisible. There was only one sentence. Don't trust Liu Huanyan. My hands started shaking. Where did you find this? She said softly. Inside the lining of my old clothes. I found it while recovering. The handwriting, she stopped, but I already understood. In my previous life, while my sister was dying, she had kept clutching at the front of her robe. She'd whispered, "Don't let them find it." I'd always believed she wanted me to protect some piece of evidence. That wasn't all. She had also left one sentence for me. I stared at the faded words. A tear struck the paper. "Don't cry," she said. "You'll smear the ink." I caught her hand. "Sister. Yes, in my previous life, I didn't save you." She looked at me. "You found me." "Too late. You still found me." I cried harder. She sighed helplessly. "Shen Yuan, how are you this good at crying in 2 different lifetimes?" I laughed through the tears. Then I threw my arms around her. At that moment, I finally understood. I'd always believed heaven sent me back, so I could save my sister. But in my previous life, with her final breath, she'd been desperately trying to save me too. Neither of us owed the other anything to the road we failed to finish in our last lives. In this one, we could finally walk it together. 1 year later, my sister opened a medical clinic for women in the capital. She didn't personally receive ordinary patients. Instead, she focused on preparing medicine, identifying poisons, and training female physicians. She said that in her other world, many women had become doctors. Women here should be able to as well. At first, grandmother complained that my sister was constantly appearing in public. Then the clinic cured one of grandmother's old friends who'd suffered from a chronic illness for years. The next day, grandmother sent the clinic an expensive plaque. She never admitted she was proud, but we all knew that brother was stationed near the capital. Father no longer focused only on military command. He began pushing for renewed inspection systems for military grain and medicine. Sheng Tingzhi was promoted to deputy chief of the Delhi court. As for me, I took control of most of the Marquis estate's businesses. I also began helping father review military supply accounts. That once I'd believed changing fate had to be something earth-shattering. Later, I learned a truly different life was simply this: my sister still alive every morning to fight me for the last piece of osmanthus cake, that grandmother still sitting in the courtyard scolding us for having no manners, that brother returning from the frontier with piles of hideous jewelry, father keeping the same stern expression every day, and someone always arriving at the Marquis estate gate before I left the house. That day, he came to take me to review case files. My sister leaned against the doorway with a knowing expression. Another investigation. Investigating with osmanthus cakes. I looked down at the food box in my hands. Therefore the road, she nodded. I understand. What do you understand? Young people. Shen Xiaoying. Yes. Be quiet. Sheng Tingzhu walked over at that moment. He looked from her to me. What are you arguing about? My sister answered first. She's embarrassed. She ran off laughing. I turned to chase her. Sheng Tingzhu caught my sleeve. Don't let go. Why, was she right? I stopped. About what? About you being embarrassed. My ears heated.
No. Oh.
His voice remained perfectly calm. Then, I suppose the question I intended to ask today can wait. I became suspicious immediately. What question? Nothing. Sheng Tingzhu. He started walking. I followed. Explain. He finally smiled after the case ended. He said, Didn't you once ask whether I had time? My steps slowed. That had been a long time ago. I hadn't expected him to remember. I do, he said. I probably will in the future, too. I stared at him. Then slowly I understood. Heat crept into my cheeks. Behind us, my sister leaned around the doorframe and shouted, Shen Yuan, are you going or not? I turned. Going where? To arrange the engagement. The entire Marquis estate went silent. Then grandmother's furious voice rang from inside. Shen Xiaoying, your sister isn't even married yet, and you're arranging her engagement for her. My brother laughed so hard, he nearly fell off the steps. Father came out with a black expression. For the first time, Sheng Tingzhu looked slightly uncomfortable. I stood in the middle of them, and suddenly, I laughed too. In my previous life, my final memory of this courtyard was fire and crying and the broken pieces of my family scattered across the ground. In this life, it was the same courtyard. The same people. But they were so noisy my ears hurt. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. For many years afterward, my sister occasionally said things none of us understood. She spoke of probability, disinfection, psychological age. She even told us of something called a mobile phone that allowed people thousands of miles apart to speak to one another. Brother refused to believe her. Grandmother accused her of talking nonsense. Father told her to stop reading strange books. Sheng Tingzhu, however, asked in complete seriousness, if such a thing truly existed, would investigations at the Delhi court become much easier? My sister froze. Then she laughed until she could barely stand. Only I knew those things came from a world none of us would ever reach. One evening, I asked her, Do you want to go back? She thought for a long time, then she shook her head. It was a good place, she said. But all of you are here. She looked at grandmother warming herself in the courtyard, at brother arguing with father about military provisions, then at me. Besides, she said, I've already come back once. I understood. She wasn't talking about the other world. She meant the Shin family. At 8, she disappeared from this home. At 16, she finally returned, and I, after living an entire lifetime, had finally truly brought my sister home, and not a pitiful girl waiting for me to protect her, but Shen Xiaoying, the woman who called me foolish, who climbed walls in secret, who recognized poisons and read accounts, and even while kidnapped remembered to leave me a trail. Years later, I still sometimes dreamed of the rain from my previous life, the ruined temple, my sister's cold hand. But every time I awoke and opened the window, there was always a light burning in the neighboring courtyard. Sometimes she hadn't yet gone to sleep. Sometimes she was already awake. Her busy silhouette moved behind the paper window. Then I knew that life was truly over. In this one, grandmother was alive. Father was alive. Brother was alive. Sister was alive. And I no longer had to live by counting the dates of tragedies that once happened. Because from the day we broke the fate that was meant to kill my sister, the future stopped belonging to my previous life. It belonged to us. I once thought rebirth was heaven giving me an answer. That later, I understood. Rebirth had only given me another chance to choose. The person who truly taught me how to escape that dead end was the sister who had once been destined to die in my arms. Shen Xiaoying, a woman who suffered for 8 years and still dared to trust her family again. And also the version of myself who finally learned to stop depending on the past. One evening, my sister sat outside her clinic drying medicinal herbs. I returned from the Delhi court. Sheng Tingzhu escorted me to the door. My sister looked at us, then smiled strangely. What? I asked. She shook her head. Nothing. I just suddenly think this is a very good scene. I walked over. What is? She shoved a basket of dried herbs into my arms. Everyone is still here. I froze. The sun was setting at the end of the street. Voices filled the capital. Carriages moved slowly past. Someone in the distance was selling osmanthus candy. Sheng Tingju stood below the steps. Brother was returning on horseback from the end of the street. When a father's servant was urging us to come home for dinner, I suddenly smiled. "You're right," I said. "Everyone is still here." My sister lifted a hand and patted my head, just as she had when we were children. "Come on, let's go home." I linked my arm through hers. "All right." This time, we went home together, and no one was ever left behind again. End of main story. Bonus story 1. 3 years after my sister opened her medical clinic, she announced something very serious. She was going to lose weight. She said it over dinner. Grandmother had just picked up a piece of braised pork. Father had just served himself a second bowl of rice. Brother still had half a chicken leg in his mouth. Sheng Tingju was sitting beside me and had just reached for a piece of sweet and sour fish to put in my bowl. Everyone stopped, but I reacted first. "What does lose weight mean?" My sister solemnly put down her chopsticks. "It means eating less." Brother looked at her bowl, already empty, and then at the dishes beside her. Only bones remained from the ribs, for chicken wings were missing. She had also eaten most of the plate of sweet glutinous lotus root. He was silent for a moment. "You call this eating less? These are my last meals," she said. Grandmother frowned. "Why would you eat less? I've gained weight." "Nonsense." She dropped the piece of braised pork directly into my sister's bowl. "Have you forgotten how thin you were when you came home? We finally managed to put some flesh on you, and now you want to lose it," my sister tried to explain. "Grandmother, I'm not going to stop eating. I'll just eat a little less." "How much less?" "Half." "Someone come here." Grandmother immediately called in an old maid. "From now on, add 1 stewed chicken to the eldest Mrs. dinner, and 1 bowl of bird's nest." My sister stared. "Grandmother." Brother burst out laughing. My sister turned on him. "What are you laughing at?" He immediately buried his face in his rice. His shoulders shook violently. Father remained relatively calm. "Why did you suddenly decide you're fat?" She fell silent. I supplied the answer helpfully. "She couldn't fit into that old dress 2 days ago." Father, brother, and Sheng Tingju all looked at her. "Shun Yuan." My sister whipped toward me. "I'm only stating facts." I immediately hid behind Sheng Tingju. He shifted forward, blocking the chopstick she was about to throw. My sister narrowed her eyes. "You're protecting her too," Sheng Tingju replied calmly. She told the truth. My sister nearly collapsed across the table with laughter. She officially began dieting the next morning. The first day, she ate only half a bowl of congee. Grandmother sat opposite, staring at her. "That's all. It's enough."
Oh.
A quarter of an hour later, a maid arrived carrying a basket of steamed dumplings. "The old madam says the eldest miss is weak." "I'm not weak." The maid smiled kindly. "If the old madam says you're weak, then you're weak, Mississippi." On the second day, my sister decided to walk more. She had barely gone 2 streets from the estate when brother caught up on horseback. "Get in the carriage." "I'm walking." "The sun is too strong." "I'm exercising." Brother frowned. "What does exercising mean?" "Walking more." "Then I'll walk with you." And so the young military commander of the capital camp walked beside his sister, leading his horse. After a while, brother grew impatient. "Walk faster." My sister sped up.
So, did he?
Eventually, their peaceful stroll became a competitive speed walk. I watched from inside the carriage, astonished. "What are they doing?" Sheng Tingju lifted the curtain and looked, perhaps competing to see who dies of exhaustion first. On the 3rd day, my sister announced she was giving up sweets. That afternoon, Sheng Tingju came to the estate and brought me osmanthus cakes. My sister passed us, stopped, looked, continued walking. 2 steps later, she came back. "Where did you buy those?" "Red Rose Shop." "New recipe, What filling?" "Osmanthus honey." My sister fell silent. Then she walked away with magnificent determination. I was so moved I nearly applauded. Half an hour later, I went to find her. She was sitting in her own courtyard. On the table, an entire box of identical osmanthus cakes sat open. She was eating the 3rd one. When she saw me, she stopped. I looked at the box, then at her. She slowly swallowed. "This doesn't count." "Why not?" "I walked a lot today." I burned it off. I didn't understand, but it sounded convincing. That night, she weighed herself. Her expression became even worse. The next morning, she announced, "I'm not dieting anymore." Grandmother immediately looked pleased. "As you should." Father nodded. Brother said, "I knew you wouldn't last 3 days." My sister looked at him coldly. "Are you very free lately?" He became cautious. "Why, my clinic needs someone to move medicine." The next morning, the young commander of the capital camp, Shen Xiaoning, was dragged to the medical clinic. He carried 20 baskets of herbs from morning until night. When he returned, he held his waist and looked as though life had lost all meaning. I asked, "Sister, I thought you stopped dieting." "I did." "Then why is brother carrying herbs?" She sipped her tea. "He talks too much." I nodded in understanding. Some things had nothing to do with gaining weight. It mainly depended on how petty a person was. And my sister was usually very petty. Bonus story too. The day Xing Tingju and I formally became engaged, the Yongning Marquis estate suffered a humiliating incident. More precisely, Xing Tingju suffered one. He came to propose marriage, accompanied by a professional matchmaker and a mountain of gifts. He had even dressed more carefully than usual. I had been restless in my room since morning. My sister leaned against the doorway and watched me for a long time. "You're nervous." "No, I'm not." "You're holding your teacup upside down." I looked down. The lid was indeed under the cup. I silently corrected it. My sister smiled. "Don't worry. He isn't going to run away." "Who's worried he'll run?" "Then why are your ears red? It's hot in here." She looked out the window. It was the 11th month. Snow had fallen that morning, mercifully. She didn't continue. Before leaving, she only added, "I'll go see whether your future husband can survive today." I shot to my feet. "What does that mean?" She was already gone when I reached the front hall. The atmosphere was extremely strange. Father sat in the main seat. Grandmother sat beside him. Brother stood at the door with his arms crossed. My sister sat in the most relaxed position of everyone. Xing Tingju sat alone in the center of the room. He looked as though he were being interrogated at the Delhi court. The matchmaker was sweating. The moment I reached the doorway, I heard Father ask, "How much is Deputy Chief Xing's annual salary?" Xing Tingju answered honestly, "Counting official pay and grain allowances, approximately." Father cut him off. "Not enough." Brother immediately followed. "How good are you with a sword?" "Acceptable." "Fight me today." "Today, he's here to propose marriage," Father said. "There will be no fighting." I relaxed, then Father continued, "Wait until the proposal is finished." The matchmaker looked like she might faint. Xing Tingju actually nodded. "All right." My sister was clearly struggling not to laugh. Grandmother finally asked, "Can you take care of someone?" At least that question was normal. I thought, yes. She narrowed her eyes. "Details." Xing Tingju seemed to discover for the first time that answering grandmother's questions was harder than interrogating criminals. She gets headaches when she stays awake too late. I froze. If she eats too many sweets, her stomach hurts. I froze again. Her hands and feet become cold in winter. Grandmother's expression softened slightly. What else? He considered. When she's angry, she becomes quiet. My sister suddenly raised her hand. I can confirm. The angrier she is, the more polite she becomes. Brother nodded too. When she called me elder brother as a child, she was usually about to report me to Father. Standing outside the door, I finally snapped. "Are you discussing my marriage or exposing every embarrassing thing I've ever done?" The room went silent. Everyone turned. I had no choice but to enter. Grandmother waved. "Come here."
You sat beside her.
Xing Tingju looked at me, a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. I glared. He immediately hid it. My sister suddenly spoke. "I have a question too." A sense of doom rose inside me. "If you argue with her after marriage," she said to Xing Tingju with great seriousness, "what will you do?" "Listen until she finishes." Nod. "Then if I'm wrong, apologize." "And if she's wrong?" Everyone stared at him. Lethal question. I stared too. Xing Tingju was silent for 2 breaths. Then he said, "Wait until she isn't angry anymore. Then explain." My sister's eyes lit up. Brother looked impressed. Even Father nodded slightly. I, however, sensed something wrong. "Why do all of you seem convinced that I'm unreasonable?" No one answered. even more suspicious. Sister? My sister said. Last question. What do you like about her? My face burned. Sister? This is a proposal. Of course, we have to ask. She looked entirely justified. Sheng Tingju didn't avoid the question. He looked at me. She's afraid of many things. The room became quiet. She's afraid something will happen to her family. Afraid she'll make the wrong decision. Afraid she won't get there in time. Yet, every time she's afraid, she still walks forward. My nose stung. I like that she knows fear, he said, but has never truly retreated because of it. The room was far too quiet. Grandmother silently lifted her tea. Father coughed. Brother abruptly turned toward the window. Even my sister, for once, didn't joke. Then she sighed. This man really knows how to talk. The entire mood collapsed. The proposal went well in the end. At least, the first half did. During the second half, my brother insisted on fighting him. They went to the training yard. The entire family followed. I stood nearby in panic. Brother, don't hit too hard. His face darkened. You're not even married yet, and you're already protecting him. My sister sat nearby eating melon seeds. Normal. Whose side are you on? I demanded. Whoever wins. They fought for nearly half an hour. Neither clearly won. Brother lowered his blade. Acceptable. Sheng Tingju bowed. You yielded. I didn't, my brother said, but he looked pleased anyway. That evening I walked Sheng Tingju to the gate. He said, your family is good. I stopped. After today, you still think that? Yes. Why? He looked back at the brightly lit marquee estate. Because they're being so serious about finding fault with me, he said. It means they truly care about whether you'll be happy after marriage. I suddenly didn't know what to say. After a few steps, I secretly hooked one finger around his sleeve. He stopped. Looked down. What are you doing? I'm worried my brother injured you. The fight is already over. Then consider it. I couldn't think of an excuse. He turned his hand and held mine properly. Then don't look for an excuse. My face burned. At that moment, a cough came from behind the gate. We turned together. Half of my sister's face appeared around the door. My brother's face appeared on the other side. Continue, my sister said. Pretend we aren't here, my brother added, furious. I picked up a ball of snow and threw it at them. They immediately ran. Sheng Tingju laughed beside me. It was the first time I realized the famously cold-faced deputy chief of the Delhi court was rather handsome when he smiled. Naturally, I never told my sister that, otherwise, she would have teased me for 3 months. Bonus story 3. My sister had one terrible flaw. The moment life became peaceful, she became bored enough to create problems. 1 year before the New Year festival, she suddenly decided our way of speaking was not keeping up with the times. I don't understand, I said. What does keeping up with the times mean? Learning new words. Why, it's fun. I turned to leave. She caught me. Don't go. I'll teach you the easiest one. I became immediately suspicious. What? She said solemnly. Giving up. What does it mean? It means when there is too much work and you stop wanting to do any of it. Being lazy. Not exactly. Isn't that still being lazy? She considered. Forget it. Next one. Then she taught me. Working stiff. I frowned. What kind of person is that? Someone who works hard every day for money. I understand instantly. A hired laborer. After a long silence, she said, that translation isn't actually wrong. Then she began corrupting the whole family. Brother returned from the military camp. Sister looked at him. Strong work smell today. He stared. What smell? She looked at the dust covering him. Never mind. Father reviewed military accounts until midnight. She passed by and stuck her head through the doorway. Father, still competing with yourself to death, he frowned. Competing with whom? Nothing. The next day, Father summoned her and made her help review ledgers for 6 hours. When she returned, she announced, I am never again discussing workplace competition in front of the boss. Who's the boss? I asked. She pointed toward Father, and I thought about it. She had a point. The most ridiculous development was grandmother. At first, she objected most strongly. When she heard my sister use a new word, absurd, meaning ridiculous, she frowned. Speak properly. My sister immediately behaved. Yes, grandmother. 3 days later, the kitchen accidentally made grandmother's sweet soup salty. She took one sip. Silence. Then she slowly said, "Absurd." The entire room froze. My sister's head snapped up. Her eyes shone. "Grandmother?" What? She looked extremely displeased with herself. My sister hid her laugh in her sleeve. "You said it yourself, grandmother.
You taught me."
Stop talking nonsense." After that, everything went out of control. Brother came home for the new year carrying a jade carving he claimed was extremely valuable. Grandmother examined it. "How much?" Brother gave the price. Her eyelid twitched. "You were cheated." Brother refused to accept it. "This is by a famous craftsman." My sister examined it. "It's honestly rather average." Grandmother suddenly said, "Sucker." Brother froze solid. Did I spat out my tea? My sister collapsed across the table. "Grandmother, who taught you that?" She calmly drank tea. "You." Brother looked lost. "What does sucker mean?" I wiped my mouth. "You, brother." Eventually, even father was affected. Someone at court attempted to shift responsibility for a military grain failure onto another official. Father returned home with a terrible expression. Grandmother asked, "What happened?" Father was silent for a moment. Then, with enormous stiffness, he said, "I encountered someone who was passing the blame." My sister nearly choked on her soup. "Father, what?" He frowned. "Did I use it incorrectly?" "No," she raised a thumb. "Perfect usage." Father looked extremely satisfied with this evaluation. The following day, he learned another expression. Brother was caught slacking at the military camp. Father came home and demanded, "Shin shouting, are you trying to give up lately?" Brother stared. "Father, who are you learning these things from?" Father looked coldly at my sister. She immediately lowered her head and concentrated on eating. Sheng Tingju was the last to fall, but at first, he refused completely. My sister asked, "The Delhi court has a lot of cases, doesn't it?" "Yes." "You work overtime every day." "What is overtime?" "Continuing to work after the time you're officially supposed to leave." He was silent, then he admitted, "The Delhi court works overtime every day."
My sister looked sympathetic.
"Being a working stiff is difficult." He frowned. "I'm not a working stiff." "Do you receive a salary from the imperial court?" "Yes." "Then you are." He stopped arguing that I assumed he would never actually use the expression, until one night. I was reviewing files with him at the Delhi court. It was very late. I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. I collapsed over the desk. "How many are left?" He looked at the mountain of case files beside us. He too fell silent. After a moment, he said in the calmest possible voice, "Let's give up." My eyes flew open. "What?" He stood and began gathering the files. "We'll continue tomorrow." I stared. "Who taught you that?" His expression remained blank. "Your sister." That same night, I returned home to confront her. But when I entered Songshao Hall, the whole family was there. That my sister was teaching grandmother another word. "This one is especially useful," she said. Grandmother asked, "What does it mean?" "It's when something bad happens to someone else, and you feel a little like laughing." Grandmother frowned. "Taking pleasure in another's misfortune, almost." "What's the expression?" My sister smiled mysteriously. "Eating melon." I stood in the doorway. A terrible feeling came over me. The next day, news arrived that second aunt's maiden family had started a legal battle over their ancestral property. Grandmother immediately ordered her maid, "Cut the melon." The maid stared blankly. "Old madam wants watermelon," grandmother replied calmly. "Didn't you say that when there's excitement to watch, one should eat melon?" Everyone turned slowly toward my sister. She lowered her head. I finally collapsed across the table laughing. Brother slapped his thigh. Father covered his forehead. Sheng Tingju turned toward the window. Though his shoulders were clearly shaking, grandmother became displeased. "What are you all laughing at?" My sister hurriedly waved her hands. "Nothing." "You think I used it wrong?" "No."
No. Perfect.
"Completely correct."
Excellent usage.
Only then was grandmother satisfied. That night, my sister came to find me. Her expression was very serious. "I've decided something." "What?" "I can't casually teach grandmother modern slang anymore." "Why?" She looked towards Songshao Hall. Her face held the exhaustion of someone who had lived too long. The elderly learn far too quickly. I laughed until I could barely breathe. The truth was, I loved these days, no assassins.
No poison.
No calculating which family member needed to be saved next. We argued over meaningless little things, fought over cakes, listened to grandmother suddenly use bizarre words. Sometimes, we laughed so hard at dinner no one could eat. My sister once told me that people in her other world had a phrase for a life like this. Peaceful years. I understood the phrase. But I thought too much peace was unnecessary. This was better. Grandmother scolding someone, brother protesting his innocence, father frowning, Shum Tingju laughing, my sister still desperately trying to explain that eating melon did not literally require eating a melon, and me, sitting in the middle of them, laughing until my stomach hurt. That was the future I had wanted most. Noisy, chaotic, ridiculous. And not one person missing.